I want to tell you about something that happened to me many years ago that changed everything I believed about money, success, and the kind of life a person can live. I was sitting in a small office, struggling to make ends meet, watching other people seem to sail through life with opportunities falling into their laps, while I felt like I was pushing a boulder uphill every single day. And I asked myself a question that probably sounds familiar to you. I said, what makes the difference? Why do some people seem to attract wealth, success, and opportunity like a magnet, while others, just as smart, just as hardworking, maybe even more hardworking, struggle their entire lives just to get by? That question haunted me. It kept me up at night. And I began a search, a real, honest-to-goodness investigation into the minds and lives of successful people. I read everything I could get my hands on. I studied Napoleon Hill's work like it was scripture. I talked to people who had built fortunes from nothing. And what I discovered changed my life forever. It wasn't luck. It wasn't connections, though those can help. It wasn't even intelligence or education, though those matter too. No, what I found was something far more powerful and far more accessible to every single person listening to my voice right now. What I discovered was that wealth, real lasting wealth, begins in one place and one place only. It begins in your mind. Now, I know that might sound too simple, maybe even a little mystical to some of you, but stay with me because I'm going to show you exactly how this works, why it works, and most importantly, how you can use this knowledge starting today to completely transform your financial reality. See, most people have it backwards. They think that success creates a successful mindset. They think that when they get the money, when they get the promotion, when they finally catch that big break, then they'll feel confident, then they'll think like a wealthy person, then their mind will be right. But that's like saying the garden will grow first, and then we'll plant the seeds. It's completely backwards. The truth, and this is a truth that Napoleon Hill spent decades documenting through interviews with over 500 of the most successful people of his time, the truth is that your mind must be trained first. Your thoughts must be disciplined and directed toward wealth and success before that wealth and success can manifest in your physical reality. You must become wealthy in your mind before you can become wealthy in your bank account. And I'm not talking about wishful thinking here. I'm not talking about just sitting around daydreaming about money. I'm talking about something much more concrete, much more scientific, and much more powerful than that. Let me explain it this way. Your mind is like a garden. And this is an analogy I want you to really take to heart. In a garden, seeds will grow. That's what seeds do. But here's the thing that most people forget. A garden doesn't care what kind of seeds you plant. If you plant tomato seeds, you get tomatoes. If you plant weed seeds, you get weeds. The soil doesn't judge. The soil doesn't say, oh, this is a good seed and this is a bad seed, I'll only grow the good ones. No. The soil accepts whatever is planted and grows it with remarkable efficiency. Your mind works exactly the same way. Whatever thoughts you plant in your mind, whatever you dwell on, whatever you think about most of the time, those are the seeds you're planting. And your mind will grow those thoughts into your reality with the same efficiency and the same lack of judgment as that garden soil. If you plant thoughts of poverty, thoughts of limitation, thoughts of fear and doubt and impossibility, well, that's exactly what your life will grow into. You'll see poverty and limitation everywhere you look. Opportunities will pass you by because you won't recognize them. You won't take action when you should because doubt will hold you back. On the other hand, if you plant thoughts of wealth, abundance, possibility, and success, if you cultivate those thoughts and protect them and nurture them the way a good gardener tends his crops, then your life will begin to manifest those things. You'll start to see opportunities you never noticed before. You'll take actions you would have been too afraid to take. You'll meet people who can help you. You'll develop skills you didn't know you had. And gradually, steadily, inevitably, your external circumstances will begin to reflect the garden you've been cultivating in your mind. Now, Napoleon Hill called this principle definiteness of purpose. He said that every single person he studied who had achieved great wealth and success had one thing in common. They knew exactly what they wanted, and they thought about it constantly. They didn't scatter their mental energy worrying about bills, complaining about the economy, or envying other people's success. No, they focused their mind like a laser beam on exactly what they wanted to achieve, and they held that focus day after day, year after year, until it became their reality. And here's what's so exciting about this. It doesn't matter where you're starting from. It doesn't matter if you're broke right now. It doesn't matter if you failed a dozen times before. It doesn't matter if you don't have a college education or rich parents or connections in high places. None of that matters because the principles of mind that govern success and wealth don't discriminate. They work for anyone who applies them, just like the law of gravity works for everyone, whether you're rich or poor, educated or not. I've seen people transform their entire financial lives by simply changing what they allow into their minds and what they choose to think about. I've seen people go from bankruptcy to abundance. I've seen people stuck in dead-end jobs discover talents and opportunities they never dreamed they had. I've seen marriages saved, health restored, and dreams that had been buried for decades suddenly spring to life, and it all started in the same place. It started with a decision to take control of their mind, to stop being a passive victim of circumstances and start being an active creator of their own reality. You see, most people are sleepwalking through life. They wake up in the morning, and before their feet hit the floor, they're already thinking about everything that's wrong. The bills, the difficult boss, the aching back, the disappointing kids, the spouse who doesn't understand them, the world that's going to hell. They turn on the news and fill their mind with fear and negativity. They go to work and complain with their coworkers. They come home and watch television shows about crime and conflict and dysfunction. And then they wonder why their life is filled with struggle and dissatisfaction. Well, what did they expect? They've been planting weed seeds all day long. They've been feeding their mind a steady diet of poison, and then they're surprised when their life doesn't flourish. You cannot cultivate a garden of success by planting seeds of failure. And here's what's fascinating: most people don't even realize they're doing it. They think they're just being realistic or preparing for the worst. But there's a world of difference between preparation and expectation. When you prepare for challenges, you're still moving forward with confidence. You're saying, I'm ready for whatever comes, and I'll handle it. But when you times expect times failure, you're actually rehearsing it. You're running the movie of defeat over and over in your mind until it becomes so familiar, so comfortable, that your subconscious mind accepts it as the blueprint for your future. I want you to think about the people you know who always seem to land on their feet, the ones who encounter the same obstacles everyone else does, but somehow they navigate through them. What's different about them? Are they smarter? More talented? Born under a lucky star? No. What's different is their internal dialogue. They've trained themselves to ask better questions. Instead of, why does this always happen to me? Which is a weed seed if there ever was one, they ask, what can I learn from this? How can I use this? What opportunity is hidden inside this challenge? See, your brain is the most sophisticated computer ever created, but like any computer, it can only work with the data you feed it. Ask it a victim's question, and it'll give you a victim's answer. Ask it an achiever's question, and watch what happens. Your mind will start scanning for solutions, for possibilities, for ways forward that you couldn't see before. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Earl, this sounds like positive thinking nonsense. I live in the real world. I have real problems. And you're right, you do have real problems. We all do. But let me ask you this. Does dwelling on them solve them? Does worrying about your finances put money in your bank account? Does complaining about your job open new opportunities? Does rehearsing worst-case scenarios prepare you for success? The answer is no. What it does is drain your energy, cloud your judgment, and broadcast to the world that you're a person to be avoided. Because here's another truth that's hard to swallow. People are attracted to growth and repelled by decay. When you're constantly negative, you're like a plant that's wilting. People instinctively move away from you. But when you're growing, when you're focused on possibilities and solutions, you become magnetic. Opportunities find you. The right people show up. Doors open that you didn't even know existed. This isn't mystical thinking, it's practical psychology. Your attitude affects your energy affects your actions, and your actions affect your results. It's a chain reaction, and it all starts with what you're thinking right now, in this very moment. Let me give you something practical you can do, starting today. For the next week, I want you to become a detective of your own thoughts. Don't try to change them yet, just notice them. Catch yourself when you say, I can't, or this won't work, or that's just my luck. Notice how often you entertain thoughts of limitation, worry, or defeat. You'll be shocked. Most people discover they're running negative mental loops dozens of times per day, sometimes dozens of times per hour. These thoughts have become so habitual, so automatic that they don't even register them as choices anymore. But they are choices, every single one. And once you become aware of them, you can start to redirect them. Not by forcing fake positivity, but by asking yourself, is this thought moving me toward what I want or away from it? Is this a seed that will grow into the life I'm trying to build? You don't have to change everything overnight. In fact, trying to do that is often what trips people up. They decide one day they're going to completely overhaul their thinking, become a different person by Monday, and when it doesn't stick, they fall right back into the old patterns and feel worse than before. Real change doesn't work like that. It's not dramatic, it's quiet, it's consistent. It's choosing moment by moment, thought by thought, to move in a slightly better direction. Think of it like steering a ship. If you're headed north and you want to go east, you don't yank the wheel all the way over. You adjust a few degrees at a time. And over the distance of miles, those few degrees put you in a completely different place. Your mind works the same way. Every time you catch a destructive thought and replace it with a constructive one, you're adjusting your course. And if you keep making those small adjustments consistently, over weeks and months, you'll look back one day and realize you're in a completely different place than where you started. Now here's something most people miss. Your thoughts don't just shape your future. They also reshape your past. I don't mean that literally, of course. What happened, happened. But the way you think about what happened, that changes everything. Two people can go through the exact same hardship. One comes out bitter, convinced the world is against them, that they'll never catch a break. The other comes out stronger, wiser, grateful for what they learned. Same event, completely different meaning. And that meaning, that's not in the event. It's in the thought. It's in the story you tell yourself about what happened. I've met men who lost everything, businesses, marriages, their health, and they'll tell you it was the best thing that ever happened to them. Not because it felt good, but because it woke them up. It forced them to think differently, to rebuild, to become someone they never would have become otherwise. I've also met men who had every advantage, every opportunity handed to them, and they're miserable because they think like victims. They focus on what's missing instead of what's possible. So here's the question you need to sit with. What story are you telling yourself about your life? Not the facts, the story, the interpretation, the meaning you've assigned to your circumstances, because that story is made of thoughts. And if the story isn't serving you, you can change it, not by lying to yourself, but by choosing a more empowering way to think about the same facts. This is where people get uncomfortable. They say, "But you don't understand my situation. You don't know what I've been through." And you're right. I don't. But I do know this. Whatever you've been through, there's someone else who went through something similar and came out the other side. And there's probably someone who went through less and gave up. The difference wasn't the circumstance. It was the thought, the decision, the story they chose to believe about what was possible. Your mind is the most powerful tool you'll ever own. But like any tool, it can build or it can destroy. It all depends on how you use it. And here's the beautiful part. You get to decide. Right now, in this moment, you can decide that from this point forward, you're going to be more intentional about the thoughts you allow to take root. You're going to treat your mind like the garden it is. You're going to pull the weeds, plant better seeds, and trust that if you do that consistently, the harvest will come. Now, I want you to think about something for a moment. What would happen if you treated your mind the way a champion athlete treats their body? An Olympic sprinter doesn't wake up on race day and suddenly decide to start training. They've been conditioning themselves for years. Every single day, they're doing the work even when they don't feel like it, even when nobody's watching, even when the progress seems invisible. They're not just running, they're visualizing, they're eating right, they're resting deliberately, they're studying their competition, they're refining their technique down to the millisecond. And here's what's fascinating. The actual race, the moment everyone sees, that's just a few seconds, maybe 10 seconds. All that work, all that preparation, for 10 seconds of performance. But those 10 seconds change everything. Your mind works the same way. The thoughts you think today, the ideas you feed yourself this week, they're training sessions. You might not see the results immediately. You might not feel different tomorrow morning. But you're conditioning yourself. You're building mental muscle. You're creating neural pathways that will serve you when the moment comes. And the moment always comes. There will be a conversation where you need confidence. There will be a decision that requires clarity. There will be an opportunity that demands you show up as the person you've been becoming, not the person you used to be. Let me tell you about a man I knew years ago. Sharp guy, talented, he had every reason to succeed. But he had this habit every morning. First thing he'd do was read the newspaper front to back. And not just read it, he'd absorb it. He'd get worked up about it. Politics, crime, disasters, scandals. He'd sit there for an hour, sometimes more, just filling his mind with problems he couldn't solve, situations he couldn't control, negativity he didn't need. Then he'd go to work and wonder why he felt anxious, why he couldn't focus, why opportunities seemed to pass him by. I finally asked him, "What are you doing?" And he looked at me like I was crazy. He said, "I'm staying informed. I need to know what's going on in the world." And I said, "Fine. But does the world need to be the first thing you put in your mind? Does that newspaper get the best of your mental energy before you've even given a thought to your own goals, your own growth, your own family?" He didn't have an answer for that. See, here's what most people don't realize. You don't just have a morning routine. Your morning routine has you. Whatever you do first, whatever you think about first, that sets the tone. That's the seed. And the rest of your day grows from that. If you start your day in reaction, scrolling through other people's lives, other people's opinions, other people's problems, you're giving away your power before you've even used it. But if you start your day with intention, if you feed your mind something nourishing, something purposeful, something that reminds you who you're becoming, everything changes. I'm not saying ignore the world. I'm saying protect your mind. Guard it like the valuable asset it is. Because here's the truth that nobody wants to hear. Your mind doesn't care what you feed it. It'll grow whatever seeds you plant. It doesn't judge. It doesn't filter. It just grows. You can plant seeds of doubt, and your mind will grow you a forest of fear. You can plant seeds of comparison, and your mind will grow you a garden of inadequacy. Or you can plant seeds of possibility, seeds of gratitude, seeds of vision, and your mind will grow you a life you're proud of. The choice is always yours. But you have to make it consciously, every single day. Most people drift through their days making no real choices at all. They react, someone cuts them off in traffic, and they explode in anger. No choice, just reaction. Their spouse says something thoughtless, and they sulk for hours. No choice, just reaction. A setback occurs at work, and they immediately assume defeat. No choice, just reaction. But there's another way. Between every stimulus and your response, there exists a space. It might be just a fraction of a second, but it's there. And in that space lies your power, your freedom, your ability to choose who you're going to be in that moment. Viktor Frankl discovered this truth in the most horrific circumstances imaginable in a Nazi concentration camp. He watched some prisoners become like animals, fighting over scraps, betraying others to survive. But he also watched others share their last piece of bread, comfort the dying, maintain their dignity when everything had been stripped away. Same circumstances, different choices. And Frankl realized something profound. The Nazis could control his circumstances, but they couldn't control his response. They could imprison his body, but not his mind. They could take everything from him, but they couldn't take his freedom to choose his attitude, his response, his inner life. If that's true in a concentration camp, how much more true is it in your daily life? You can choose to see an obstacle as a disaster or as information. You can choose to interpret criticism as an attack or as feedback. You can choose to view a failure as evidence of your inadequacy or as a necessary step toward mastery. Same facts, different choices, completely different outcomes. Now, I'm not talking about positive thinking or pretending problems don't exist. I'm talking about something far more powerful, the conscious selection of useful interpretations. Because here's what most people never grasp. Reality is vast and complex, and your brain can only process a tiny fraction of it at any given moment. So it selects what to focus on based on your habitual patterns of attention. If you've trained yourself to look for threats, you'll find them everywhere. If you've trained yourself to look for opportunities, you'll find those instead. The threats and opportunities both exist simultaneously. Your choice determines which reality you inhabit. Let me give you a practical example. Two salespeople go out on the same day, calling on the same types of prospects in the same market. The first gets 5 rejections in a row and thinks, "This isn't working, maybe I'm in the wrong business. Maybe I'm not cut out for this." He goes home defeated, and his performance spirals downward. The second salesperson gets 5 rejections in a row and thinks, "Interesting, I'm hitting some resistance. Maybe my approach needs adjustment. What can I learn from this?" She goes home, reviews her pitch, makes some modifications, and comes back stronger the next day. 6 months later, she's a top performer while the first salesperson is looking for a new job. Same rejections, different interpretations, different choices, completely different careers. This is the daily practice that transforms your life, catching yourself in those moments of automatic reaction and inserting conscious choice. It feels awkward at first, like learning any new skill. You'll forget. You'll slip back into old patterns. That's normal. That's part of the process. But gradually, over time, you'll notice the space between stimulus and response getting wider. You'll catch yourself sooner. You'll have more options available to you in difficult moments. And eventually, conscious choice becomes your new automatic response. This is how you rewire your brain. Not through affirmations or wishful thinking, but through the repeated practice of choosing better interpretations, better responses, better actions in the thousands of small moments that make up your days. Now, you might be wondering, what does this look like in practical terms? How do you actually apply this in the messy, complicated reality of your daily life? Let me give you a concrete example. Let's say you're in a meeting at work, and someone criticizes your idea. That old automatic response might be defensiveness, your heart rate increases, your jaw tightens, you're already formulating your rebuttal before they've finished speaking. You're not listening anymore, you're protecting. But here's where the pause comes in. You notice that physical response, you recognize it, and instead of letting it drive your behavior, you create that space. In that space, you can ask yourself a different question. What if this criticism contains something useful? What if this person is actually trying to help me see a blind spot? Now, maybe they're not. Maybe they're just being difficult. But by choosing that interpretation, by choosing to look for value first, you've changed everything. Your body language shifts, your tone changes. You're curious instead of defensive. And 9 times out of 10, that shift completely transforms the interaction. The same principle applies everywhere. Your teenager comes home with a failing grade, and your automatic response is anger and disappointment. But what if you pause? What if you choose to see this as information rather than failure? What if you ask, "What happened here? What do you need?" Instead of launching into a lecture about responsibility, your partner forgets something important to you, and that old story about not being valued starts playing. But what if you choose a different story? What if you simply address the specific situation without making it mean something about your entire relationship? This is what conscious living looks like. It's not about becoming some perfectly zen person who never feels upset or disappointed. It's about recognizing that you have a choice in how you respond to those feelings. You have a choice in the meaning you assign to events. You have a choice in what you do next. And here's what's remarkable. When you start making these choices consistently, when you start exercising this power deliberately, your entire experience of life begins to shift. Not because your circumstances have necessarily changed, though often they do, but because you've changed your relationship to your circumstances. Problems don't disappear, but they become challenges instead of catastrophes. Setbacks don't devastate you, because you've trained yourself to look for the opportunity or lesson they contain. Criticism doesn't crush you, because you've learned to extract value without taking on shame. You become, in the truest sense, response-able, able to respond rather than react, able to choose rather than default, able to create rather than simply cope. And the people around you notice, they feel it. Because when you're operating from this place of conscious choice, you bring a different energy to every interaction. You're more present, more genuine, more solid. You're not being buffeted around by every wind that blows through your day. This doesn't mean you become cold or detached. In fact, it's quite the opposite. When you're not consumed by automatic reactions, when you're not constantly in fight or flight mode, you actually have more capacity for genuine connection, for empathy, for love. You can afford to be generous when someone's having a bad day, because you're not taking their mood personally. You can afford to be patient when things don't go according to plan, because you're not locked into rigid expectations about how everything should be. And perhaps most importantly, when you stop taking everything personally, you free others to be themselves. Think about how exhausting it is to be around someone who takes offense at everything. People start walking on eggshells, measuring every word, monitoring their expressions. The relationship becomes a minefield rather than a sanctuary. But when you cultivate this perspective, when you demonstrate through your responses that you're not going to crumble or attack over every slight, you give the people around you permission to breathe, to be human, to make mistakes. I think this is especially important in how we raise children. Kids need room to figure out who they are, and they can't do that if they're constantly worried about managing our emotions. When a child comes home with a bad grade, or says something thoughtless, or goes through a rebellious phase, they're not doing it to hurt us, they're navigating their own development. The parent who can maintain perspective, who doesn't interpret every teenage eye roll as a personal betrayal, creates space for authentic growth. You're teaching them, through your example, that people can disagree, disappoint, or differ without it threatening the fundamental bond. The same principle applies in the workplace. The boss who doesn't take every question as a challenge to their authority, the colleague who doesn't interpret every success as a threat, these are the people who create environments where innovation flourishes. Because here's what happens in organizations where leaders take everything personally. People stop speaking up. They stop offering ideas. They stop pointing out problems. The cost of potentially offending someone becomes too high, so everyone just goes quiet and follows orders, even when they can see the ship heading toward the rocks. Now, I want to address something that might be bothering you as you listen to this. You might be thinking, but what about real betrayals? What about genuine harm? Aren't there times when things really are personal? And yes, absolutely, I'm not suggesting you become a doormat or that you never draw boundaries. There's a crucial difference between not taking things personally and not taking things seriously. If someone repeatedly disrespects you, that's information. If someone violates your trust, that's real. If someone causes harm, that matters, and you should respond accordingly. But even in these situations, the lens of "it's not personal" helps you respond more effectively. When you recognize that even the person who betrayed you did so because of their own limitations, their own wounds, their own failures of character, it doesn't excuse the behavior, but it does help you avoid the secondary suffering of making it mean something about your worth. The person who embezzles from your business isn't making a statement about your value as a human being. They're making a choice that reflects their relationship with integrity, probably rooted in desperations or rationalizations you'll never fully understand. You can fire them, prosecute them, end the relationship, but you don't have to carry the additional burden of interpreting their actions as some cosmic judgment on you. This perspective also helps you recognize patterns without getting lost in them. When you stop taking things personally, you can see more clearly. You might notice that you keep attracting a certain type of relationship, or that you keep ending up in similar conflicts. But instead of thinking, "Why does this always happen to me? What's wrong with me?" which keeps you stuck in victim mode, you can ask, "What am I not seeing here? What pattern am I participating in?" That's a completely different question, and it leads somewhere productive. It's the difference between drowning in the waves and learning to read the current. When you're not overwhelmed by personal offense, you can observe, "Interesting, whenever I do X, this other person does Y. What if I tried Z instead?" You become a student of human nature rather than a victim. All of it. You begin to see patterns you never noticed before. You realize that certain conversations always seem to escalate at the same point, not because the other person is deliberately trying to provoke you, but because there's a predictable trigger. Maybe it's a specific topic, a tone of voice, or even a time of day when everyone's tired and hungry. Armed with this knowledge, you can make different choices. You can steer the conversation earlier, address the issue before tensions rise, or simply recognize that this isn't the right moment for this discussion. This detachment gives you something most people never develop: strategic patience. You understand that not every battle needs to be fought right now. Some conflicts resolve themselves with time. Some misunderstandings clear up when people have had a chance to cool down and reflect. By not being emotionally hijacked by every slight or disagreement, you can choose your moments. You can decide when to push forward and when to let things settle. And here's something fascinating that happens. People start to trust you more. Think about it. Who do you trust more? Someone who's predictably reactive, whose responses you can never quite gauge, who might explode over something minor. Or someone who remains steady, who listens even when challenged, who responds thoughtfully rather than reflexively. The person with detachment becomes the person others turn to in crisis, because they know you won't make the situation worse with your own emotional turmoil. This is particularly powerful in leadership. Whether you're leading a team at work, raising children, or simply being a stable presence in your community, your emotional detachment, your ability to not take things personally, creates a kind of gravitational center. When chaos swirls around, people orient themselves by your calm. They think, if she's not panicking, maybe things aren't as bad as they seem. If he's still thinking clearly, there must be a blue way through this. But let me be clear about something crucial. This detachment doesn't mean you become cold or indifferent to others' pain. In fact, it's quite the opposite. When you're not consumed by your own emotional reactions, you actually have more capacity for genuine empathy. You can hear what someone is really saying beneath their angry words. You can recognize that their criticism of you might actually be an expression of their own fear or hurt. You can hold space for their emotions without being swept away by them. This is the difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy says, "You're drowning, and now I'm drowning with you." Empathy says, "I see that you're struggling, and I'm here with you. But I'm not going to lose myself in your struggle, because that won't help either of us." Detachment is what makes true empathy possible. Now, you might be wondering, doesn't this take an enormous amount of energy? Doesn't it require constant vigilance and self-monitoring? And the answer is yes, at first. Like any new skill, it's awkward and demanding in the beginning. You'll catch yourself halfway through an emotional reaction and think, "Oh, there I go again, taking it personally." But gradually, with practice, it becomes more natural. The pause between stimulus and response lengthens, the old patterns lose their grip, and you'll notice something wonderful. As you take things less personally, you actually enjoy your relationships more. Conversations become lighter because you're not constantly scanning for hidden insults. Disagreements become interesting rather than threatening. You can hear feedback without your entire identity feeling attacked. You can even laugh at yourself, which might be one of the greatest freedoms of all.